a.m. I stood frozen inside the high-voltage equipment room, sweat mixed with oil stains on my hands after a 14-hour shift under the scorching heat of the Qatari desert. At that moment, all I could think about was a cold shower and collapsing into bed before the next shift alarm screamed again. But when my phone screen lit up inside my protective pants pocket, my life veered off in another direction. I'm leaving, on my way to Santa Barbara with him, 25, full of passion. Just one line, a bright red heart emoji at the end. My heart didn't race, didn't break, didn't feel anything, just empty space. I pulled off my glove, thumb sliding over the screen, slick with desert dust. Another message popped up, a screenshot of the joint bank account between me and my wife. Balance, 0. 3 months ago, that account held over $130,000 in hard-earned wages. Now, just a blank figure. She even added a winking smiley face, like this was some cute joke between old friends. I didn't smash the phone. Didn't scream. Didn't ask why. I typed one line. Good luck. I powered off the phone, shoved it back in my pocket, and walked toward the saltwater shower behind the container. They call me Ezra, 48, chief engineer on one of the largest gas rigs in the Western Middle East. 22 years of surviving heat waves, monster compressors, and the metallic screeches of high-pressure machinery. I used to think nothing could shake me, but with one message she flipped everything. Back in the control room, the young deputy supervisor, Miguel, glanced at me. Usually, I'd crack a joke about the cafeteria's tragic lunch or the pressure pump sounding like a haunted boiler. Today, I stayed silent. Miguel knew something was off, but understood not to ask. Out here, personal drama stays outside the steel walls. One wrong decision could drop the whole platform into the sea. That morning, I skipped breakfast and buried myself in the job, hands locked on pressure valves, eyes glued to the control board. But my mind kept drifting, to that first moment I met her in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Bakersfield, her eyes fiery behind the wheel of an old Mustang, and those nights we argued for hours just to end in a desperate hug like the world was collapsing. 15 years of marriage. Not always perfect, but I never questioned our loyalty. I worked my life away on these job sites so she could have comfort and safety. I believed that was enough. I was wrong. During lunch break, I turned the satellite connection back on. Another message, a PDF from her lawyer. Divorce petition. The reason? Ezra has long abandoned the marriage, spending excessive time overseas, showing emotional neglect. At the bottom was a cold note. My client is requesting financial support in line with Mr. Whitmore's income. There it was, while I lived in a sea of sand, eating cold meals and breathing gas fumes, she laid next to a young, half-naked guy in the house I'd built brick by brick. I'd never seen his face, but I knew the type. Solid build, tank top, smug grin, and empty compliments about morning coffee. I closed the file, no reply. No complaining. I thought of one person. Levi, my cousin in Austin, a former financial advisor turned private consultant. I used to joke that if my life ever crashed, Levi would be my first call. I logged into our private inbox and typed just one line. It's time. Activate cold fall protocol. 2 minutes later, the reply appeared. Ready. Don't react until you're back. I put the phone away, looked up at the sun roasting my skull, and understood. She thought she'd already won, but the game wasn't over. 2 days after that breakup message hit mid-shift, I sat alone in the control bay, screen light casting shadows across my sunburned face. Each minute dragged by, tangled in memories, fury, and disbelief. I fought to stay stoic, but emotions always leak through silence. I opened the encrypted inbox Levi and I shared. One new message. Ease. She's hired a shark in San Diego. Grant Aldridge. Specializes in divorces with over $2 million in assets. Helped one woman win 70% from a surgeon. This won't be easy. I straightened in my seat, reading every word like a safety manual for an explosive rig. Nothing romantic here, just a tactical war for control. The email continued. He's filed for long-term spousal support, claiming emotional damage caused by your absence, using your international contracts and offshore schedule to argue financial and emotional abuse. I let out a dry laugh. Emotional abuse? I've worked myself raw on this rig, sending nearly everything home for upkeep and comfort. She never lacked. Now that's being weaponized against me? Grant Aldridge clearly knew how to craft a sympathetic narrative, the kind that sways a judge toward the weaker party. That weaker party was reclining on an Italian leather couch I bought last year, living under a roof I insured, sipping wine paid for by a credit card I didn't even know had booked a weekend in Carmel. That night, I called home, not to beg, not to explain, just to confirm, but the line was dead. Landline disconnected. Her cell was off. I tried the neighbor, Mr. Dwight, the man who once helped fix my roof after last year's storm. I hate to be the one saying this, Ezra, he said cautiously, but there's a young, fit guy driving a white Camaro, moved in last week, waved at me while I was mowing, said, "I'm Christine's new boyfriend. I thought you knew." I didn't reply right away. My throat clenched. Thanks, Dwight. The next day, Levi sent more files. One included a traffic cam photo of that Camaro turning into my street near midnight, a big crate in the back. Attached was a copy of a court document, a request for temporary sole occupancy of the marital residence. Krista claimed I vanished for months and made her feel safe when I returned. At the bottom, Grant requested a minimum of $6,000 in monthly support to maintain my client's lifestyle. I turned the ceiling fan up to high. Not from heat, I just needed the noise to drown out the fury in my head. She didn't just take everything, she rewrote the story. Right then, I knew I couldn't fight on their field. I had to bring the game to mine. I opened the backup laptop, logged into the accounting system Levi set up 3 years ago, the one where I discreetly redirected 60% of my income from overseas contracts. All legal, all declared, but shielded from anyone not named on the accounts. As I scanned through financial reports, one charge stood out. A $2,400 deposit at a wedding venue in Ventura County, made 2 weeks before I got that divorce text. I wasn't sure whether they were planning some kind of ceremony or just pulling off a cheap stunt to legitimize their new relationship, but clearly, they believed I'd never make it back in time to see it. I turned on the security camera system in the house, something I'd kept running remotely out of pure professional habit. The feed came up. A blonde-haired young man was lounging in the living room, feet propped up on the wooden table I'd built by hand, wearing my old hoodie, laughing loudly during a video call. Behind him was Krista, cradling a wine glass, her back turned to the camera. I didn't say a word, just hit the screenshot button. That afternoon, the desert wind scorched my face as I climbed up to the main control room. My eyes stung from lack of sleep, but my mind was sharp, dissecting each move of my opponent like under a microscope. The woman I had once shared a bed with for over a decade wasn't a partner anymore. She was an adversary. And in this game, I had no intention of losing. I opened my personal laptop and logged into the secure network Levi had set up back when I was stationed in Abu Dhabi. I typed a single command: deploy Coldstone. That code had been created 7 years ago after I watched a colleague lose everything because he trusted the wrong woman during an offshore project in Nigeria. Since then, Levi and I had built a protective system, not illegal, but sophisticated enough to separate ownership and shield earnings from any civil claims. Less than 2 minutes later, Levi responded. Control transferred to emergency mode. Winter Hill Company's assets are locked, all external access suspended. Winter Hill, named after a bald ridge behind the childhood cabin I owned in Montana, was now the legal shell for nearly $1.4 million I had accumulated over the past 8 years. Contracts in Kuwait, Saudi, and the Gulf region all routed through this entity, with no named shareholder. All income was declared, fully taxed. But Krista never knew those funds were out of her reach. I continued reading the report Levi had attached. It included details from our automatic fund monitoring system. 6 days earlier, Krista had made 3 consecutive withdrawals from one of my secondary accounts, the one I use for groceries, insurance, utilities. But this time, the money was funneled into a different account, registered to Harper & Son Property Solutions, LLC. I racked my memory. That name had never appeared in our list of vendors or bills. I forwarded the info to Levi immediately. 30 minutes later, he called through the secure line. Ezra, that LLC was registered 3 months ago. The listed address matches your old apartment in Flagstaff. The owner is Devin Hayes. My grip on the mouse tightened until my knuckles cracked. Devin Hayes, the same guy from the camera footage, wearing my clothes, drinking my whiskey, living in my home? It wasn't just an affair. She had helped him convert the money I sent home into assets under a fake company. Levi continued. I've looped in 2 forensic finance analysts. Looks like they're preparing to liquidate everything they can, cash, collectibles, jewelry, and vanish before the court can react. I left the control room and headed down into the machinery bay, my hand brushing across a cold row of switches. The low hum of engines vibrated beneath the floor. The only thing I still had full control over. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Hi Ezra, this is Brooke. I used to be friends with Krista. I don't know if I should say this, but I saw her listing some of your stuff on Facebook Marketplace. Military watch collection, vintage speakers, even that handcrafted knife set from Alaska. I replied with a quick thank you and went straight to the Marketplace app. It took exactly 90 seconds to find a profile named Annie L., selling the exact items. Pictures were clearly taken in my living room. The prices? Dirt cheap. Every listing ended with urgent sale, no holds. She wasn't just cleaning out belongings, she was erasing me. Every item was a memory I'd picked up from years of travel. There was no doubt left. Krista wanted to wipe me from the life I had built with my own hands. I didn't sleep that night. At 3:22 a.m., Levi texted. They're likely flying out. 2 one-way tickets to San Jose leaving next Monday. I'll block the transaction if you confirm. I typed back, do it. Trigger the bank reversal. Send the preliminary fraud file to Thomas. Less than a minute later. Gone. Devin's account frozen. Fraud alert issued to the credit bureau. Preliminary file submitted to attorney Thomas. Every piece was now in place. They thought I was still buried somewhere in the Middle East, blinded by steel and crude. But the truth was, I was already home. I'm not someone who clings to the past once it's burned down. But sometimes, to understand why you fell so far, you've got to trace every stone that crumbled under your feet. Somewhere in the silence of that return flight to Texas, my mind wandered back to the earliest years of our marriage. Krista once made me believe I was the luckiest man alive. We met at a small gas station in Redding, California. I was driving cross-country after wrapping up a 2-month project in Alberta. She was the overnight shift manager. Raspy voice like an old radio, but spoke in a way that made strangers feel familiar. I was 36, had just signed a new gas contract in Kuwait. She was 34, divorced, no kids, and seemed to understand the value of stability better than most. We got married less than 11 months later after a trip to Lake Tahoe. Krista said she loved my calm. The way I didn't make empty promises, just did what needed to be done. I loved the way she stared into the distance like anywhere could be home if we went there together. But over time, that gaze shifted. It started with small things. Video calls grew shorter. Instead of asking what I ate or how I slept, Krista talked about broken air conditioning or noisy neighbor dogs. When I asked about her, she waved it off. Same old stuff. At 44, she suddenly said she was taking weekend interior design classes in San Luis Obispo. I felt proud, thought she was trying to add color to her life, but that class became the reason she skipped Christmas with my parents. Then it became the excuse for not picking me up from the airport. Group project presentation, she said. A year later, our home in Visalia looked completely different when I returned. Krista casually said, I just needed a change. Everything. The couch, the curtains, even the paint was replaced. I felt like a stranger in my own house. I asked, You redid everything without telling me? She shrugged. I didn't think you'd care. You're never home. I stayed quiet, That was the first time I realized the distance between us wasn't about miles anymore. It was inside the walls. In the months that followed, I noticed vague charges on the secondary card she used. Plumbing deposit, landscape consultation, foundation inspection. But when I called the contractors we'd worked with, none of them had any record of recent jobs. When I confronted her, Krista shot back instantly. I hired someone new. The old crew was awful. I don't know why I believed her. Maybe part of me still wanted to preserve something. Whether that was weakness or loyalty, I honestly couldn't say. 3 months before I got the divorce text, I called home after my dinner break. Krista didn't pick up. A while later, she messaged, "Training for a new project at the gym. I'll call you tomorrow." She'd never had a habit of working out before. When I asked more about the project, she answered vaguely, "A friend's showing me some new fitness techniques, just testing it out." Her reply felt like a foggy curtain hiding something growing darker behind it. When I flew home for leave earlier that year, there was a strange scent in our bedroom. Not my cologne, and not any perfume Krista had ever worn. I found a pair of men's athletic shoes under the living room chair. She said they belonged to a cousin staying over, but I'd met all her relatives. None of them had feet that big. The moment I remember most clearly was stepping into the backyard and seeing that the fence had been replaced with expensive timber I'd never approved. Krista just smiled and said, "They gave it to me as part of a model home makeover program." Another lie, smooth, rehearsed. At that point, I'd started suspecting, but I never imagined she could fabricate everything, finances and affection, with such cold precision. I thought I knew my wife. Turns out, I only knew the version she let me see. I replayed the surveillance footage from our home security system and froze on one frame. Krista sitting in the backyard, eyes locked on her phone, smiling brightly. I had never seen her smile like that at me. Had he just texted her something? Or were they already dreaming about a comfortable life funded by the sweat I'd poured into my work? All those questions led me to one choice. I had to see more clearly, not just about her, about myself too, so I'd never fall into a trap like that again. That evening, I landed in Houston. Levi picked me up at the airport in his beat-up SUV that still smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather. On the passenger seat was a thick stack of documents in a black leather folder. He didn't say much, just slid the file toward me and hit the highway. I flipped open the first page. Bold letters on the cover, irregular transactions, Ezra Whitmore, January through June. Below that, a detailed breakdown of withdrawals from the secondary account I used to manage household expenses. Groceries, insurance, utilities. Total, over $214,000. Not $130,000 like I originally thought. All routed into a newly opened account at a local bank under the name Krista Langley. Her maiden name. I frowned. "Why didn't you catch this sooner?" Levi kept his eyes on the road, replying calmly. The account was set up as a sole proprietorship. She registered it as the face of a fake cosmetics brand that never operated. Each transfer was between $3 to $5 grand. Small enough to stay off the radar. But in the last 3 months, the amount spiked. She's pulling it all together and prepping to disappear. I flipped to the next page. A scanned copy of a home equity loan agreement appeared. $40,000. Approved 4 months ago. The borrower's signature was mine. But it wasn't my handwriting. I stared at the forged name, blood rushing to my temples. Ashley forged my signature? Levi nodded. "And that's not all." He opened his laptop, ran a few commands, and turned the screen to me. A page from the insurance company's site loaded, showing the beneficiary of my personal life insurance policy. The name was no longer who I had originally listed. It now said, Devin Hayes. I froze. "That's the guy living in my house," I practically growled. "Exactly. And you need to see this." Levi opened another tab. A profile compiled from public records and civil investigations. Devin Hayes, 25 years old, no stable employment, 3 suspicious relationships with older women. Each ended after about 18 months. The women were left bankrupt, their assets sold off or transferred, and Devin vanished without a trace. "You got a record?" I asked. Never convicted, but in one case, the woman's ex-husband died in a car crash shortly after the divorce. Police suspected brake tampering, but they didn't have enough evidence. Case was closed due to lack of witnesses. I stared at the report line. Vehicle veered off cliff. Time, 2:17 a.m. No surveillance cameras. Part of me wanted to storm home and confront both of them. But Levi rested a hand on my shoulder and said steadily, "Not yet. You need hard proof and perfect timing. If not, they'll wipe their tracks clean. They're not stupid." I exhaled slowly and closed the folder. Each page felt like another small blade slicing into the last strands of trust I had. She hadn't just betrayed our relationship. She'd mapped out every step to drain me, dollar by dollar, while I kept sending money home, thinking I was supporting our future. I looked out the passenger window as the city lights blurred past like molten plastic. Out there, Devon was probably using my toothbrush. Krista might have been wearing the shirt I carefully hung up for our next dinner together. Now, they were using everything I paid for to perform a farce of a marriage. In the home I'd built with my own hands. "Can we freeze any accounts under Devon's name?" I asked. Already in motion, I sent a suspicious activity alert to the bank. Their system will automatically lock the account if another large withdrawal happens. But you need to meet with Thomas as soon as possible. He's prepped the lawsuit, forged documents, organized financial fraud, the whole thing. I clenched my fists. Tomorrow. Levi glanced at me through the rear-view mirror. "There's one more thing. Why?" Devon hired a lawyer, not for defense, to help Krista transfer partial ownership of the house to his LLC. They're trying to legitimize his stake before you get back. I didn't respond, just closed my eyes and drew a long breath. At that moment, it wasn't numbers or documents running through my head. It was the image of the wrought iron gate leading to the backyard, the wooden table I'd built under the oak tree, and the familiar silhouette of the woman I once called my wife, now slowly transforming into the shape of a stranger. We arrived at attorney Thomas Becker's office early the next morning. It was a 3-story red brick building tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Houston. Not the kind of place you'd expect a carefully calculated counterattack to begin. Thomas, a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair, carried the calm demeanor of someone who had seen every trick in the book when it came to high-stakes divorce. Skipping the small talk, he slid a fresh folder across the desk and said, "We're ready. Full counterpetition for divorce, criminal complaints for forgery, financial fraud, and asset misappropriation. If you sign, I'll file with the court this morning." I flipped quickly through the pages. Secret withdrawals, a mortgage loan with a forged signature, the change of beneficiary on my life insurance, all laid out clearly with solid evidence to back it up. I signed where Thomas indicated, no hesitation, no shaky hands. He nodded. "Good. Now, here's something I think you don't know yet." Thomas picked up a tablet and opened a set of messages extracted from the iCloud account Krista had synced to the old iPhone I'd bought her last year. She'd never changed the iCloud password. Thought I would notice. She was wrong. The screen displayed a conversation between Krista and Devon. "Krista, are you sure this is really dangerous?" Devon, "Do you want to live in Palm Springs or not?" Krista, "But what if Ezra finds out?" Devon, "He won't. He's working halfway across the world. Just get him to sign the account authorization." Krista, "And if he refuses?" Devon, "Guys on oil rigs, accidents happen." I looked at Thomas, my voice low. "What's he implying?" Thomas replied, calm but chilling. "They're suggesting a plan B, removing you so they can collect your life insurance. They know your job is high risk." One well-timed accident. I didn't speak. What started as shock had slowly crystallized into something colder. Anger. Not because I nearly lost money, but because someone I once loved viewed my existence as an obstacle to be erased. Thomas continued, "We have the entire conversation from the cloud backup, photos, call history, login timestamps, all legally admissible." I asked, "Can we counter the abuse allegations she filed with the court?" He nodded. "We filed the motion to dismiss this morning. It includes records from your company, confirming your badge ID has been active in Qatar for 8 continuous weeks. We also submitted passport stamps and satellite phone location logs. There's no way she can argue you were even close enough to threaten her, let alone abuse." I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Everything was falling into place. The law would take it from here. But there was still one thing I needed. "She doesn't know I'm back," I said. "I want to keep it that way until the very last second." Thomas nodded. "We've arranged for the court officer and sheriff to serve papers to both of them Thursday morning when they show up to finalize the new loan. They think they're about to receive cash, but they'll get something else." I smirked. "I'll be there, but from a distance. I want to see their faces when it all comes down." Thomas paused, then gently slid another document my way. "If this plays out right, this will be the knockout." I glanced at the cover. "Emergency petition to freeze all assets held by or related to Devin Hayes and Krista Langley." I signed. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about betrayal, the kind that stains a lifetime. As we left the office, I pulled out my phone and logged into the backyard security camera feed. Devin was sunbathing in the same chair I used to read on during weekends, wine glass on the armrest. Krista walked out from the kitchen, holding a stack of documents. The scene, disturbingly peaceful, felt like a farce. I zoomed in on the paper in her hand, Pacific First Bank's logo at the top corner. They were prepping another loan application. Thought they had it all locked in. But on Thursday morning, they wouldn't just lose the money, they'd lose everything. I arrived in Kerrville on a quiet Wednesday night when most street lights had dimmed and the crickets chirped in the oak grove behind the row of homes. Harold Highness, the retired gas engineer who lived across from my old house, greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing look. No questions. He poured me a glass of bourbon and led me upstairs to the second-floor guest room, which had a clear view of the backyard I once called mine. That house now glowed on the ground floor, laughter echoing from the living room, familiar sounds now twisted with bitterness. I opened my laptop and connected to the internal surveillance system I'd secretly maintained for 3 years. The feed came up. Devin, busy dismantling the bookshelf, packing items into boxes. Krista moved around the kitchen, filling more bins. In the center of the dining table was a thick stack of documents. I zoomed in. It was a listing agreement from a local real estate agency. The contact number was new, not mine, not hers. Devin Hayes. They were actually trying to sell the house, my name still on the deed, my credit tied to the loan, and now they were quietly transferring ownership through an LLC to disappear. 9 a.m. Thursday was the moment everything would unfold. Thomas had arranged for county officers and a court agent to arrive precisely as the traders prepared to sign the disbursement agreement. I stayed up all night, watching from Harold's guest window, tracking every movement. At 4:15 a.m., 2 small moving trucks pulled up. Drivers and 2 young guys began loading boxes. I watched as they lifted the oak chest that held my father's hunting knives, the ones Krista once promised to protect as family heirlooms. By 8:30 a.m., the sun had warmed the rooftops and dew still clung to the grass. Krista stepped out in a beige overcoat, hair tied neatly, light makeup, looking just like she did when we first met my parents 15 years ago. Devin followed, carrying a large leather bag, probably full of documents and a laptop. They smiled, laughed, completely unaware they were being watched from 3 angles. A message pinged from Thomas. Court car just arrived. At exactly 8:55 a.m., a black sedan parked behind the moving truck. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, joined by a woman in professional attire with a courthouse badge. They crossed the yard and knocked 3 times. Krista answered the door. Her polite smile froze when the badge was held up. "Mrs. Krista Langley, you are being served in connection with a civil and criminal case filed by Mr. Ezra Whitmore." I stepped out of Harold's house and slowly walked across the street. My heart stayed steady. My hands didn't shake. Every emotion had been forged into steel over the past few weeks. As I reached the edge of the driveway, Devin turned around at the sound of my name. He froze mid-step, still holding his bag. Krista's face drained of all color. She backed up, one hand brushing the doorframe. "Ezra, you're not supposed to be back," she stammered. I looked at her calmly. Actually, I've been just 1 block away. Devin cut in, trying to sound reasonable. We can explain, this is just a misunderstanding. I interrupted, eyes still locked on Krista. A long-term financial plot, a stream of secret transfers, a forged signature, and a vague comment about an occupational accident? Nothing about this is a misunderstanding. The court officer handed a second folder to Devin. Mr. Devin Hayes, by order of the court. All assets associated with Harper & Son LLC, including any funds transferred to your personal accounts over the past 6 months, are hereby frozen pending investigation. Devin quickly turned to head back into the house, but a police officer stepped forward, calm yet firm. Only personal belongings are allowed. The rest will be inventoried under legal supervision. Krista stood frozen, tears welling up but never falling. She looked at me as if waiting for one final ounce of mercy. I said nothing. My gaze alone told her every door had closed, not out of anger, but because she had been the one to destroy everything once called trust. I turned and walked away slowly, leaving behind 2 people who mistook my silence for weakness. What they didn't know, that very silence was the path that led to the ending they never saw coming. The hearing took place on a gray Monday morning, 3 weeks after the court papers were served. Courtroom 4 in the Kendall County Courthouse was small but packed. Krista sat across the room, visibly pale, light makeup, wearing a dark dress. Gone was the confident glamour she once wore like armor. The seat next to her was empty. Devin didn't show up. Presiding was Judge Clara Whitley, known for her firm rulings in divorce cases involving financial fraud. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her direct gaze made the room heavy with tension from the first minute. I sat next to Thomas, clutching a thick folder. In front of us was all the evidence: screenshots of the withdrawals, a copy of the mortgage application with the forged signature, transcripts of messages from the iCloud backup, and the insurance beneficiary change naming Devin. Judge Whitley began by asking both sides to present. Krista's attorney, a silver-haired man named Alan Richter, spoke first. My client simply felt abandoned in a 13-year marriage. Mr. Whitmore was absent for more than 8 months of the year, creating an isolating and emotionally damaging environment. Her recent financial actions, we argue, were acts of self-preservation after years of control. Thomas didn't respond right away. He simply stood and placed a nearly 2-inch thick binder on the judge's desk. Your Honor, the defense has detailed evidence showing that the plaintiff engaged in a calculated plan to misappropriate marital assets for at least 14 months. This includes covert transfers to personal accounts, forgery of mortgage documents, and most seriously, the alteration of a life insurance beneficiary, paired with messages suggesting intent to harm my client. Judge Whitley paused her reading and looked up. What messages? Thomas opened the tablet and selected the relevant exchange between Krista and Devin. Devin, he works at height every day. You know what can happen. Krista, I don't feel right about Plan B. Devin, accidents happen all the time. The judge ordered the exchange read aloud. The courtroom fell silent. As the message played, a few spectators shook their heads. Krista looked down, her face flushed. I never looked away from her, not out of rage, but because I needed her to face every secret she thought she had buried. Judge Whitley turned to her. Mrs. Langley, do you contest the content of this message? Krista stammered. It was just a joke between us. I never meant to actually... The judge's voice was cold as steel. This court does not interpret intentions, it evaluates evidence. And the evidence points to an organized scheme to acquire assets and a potential threat to Mr. Whitmore's safety. She continued reading through the file, from secret transfers to the real estate listing. Each page she turned was another crack in the paper-thin defense Krista's attorney had tried to build. What about Mr. Hayes? The judge asked. Thomas stood. Not present, Your Honor. But bank records show he withdrew over $18,000 from a joint account the plaintiff had transferred to him, just 2 days after being served. Home security footage confirms he left the state that morning with a travel bag and what appeared to be jewelry. His whereabouts are currently unknown. Judge Whitley paused, then removed her glasses. In my 27 years on the bench, I've witnessed many bitter, painful divorces. But rarely have I seen a plot so deliberate, so systematically crafted. This was not mere betrayal. This was cold, calculated manipulation, without a shred of hesitation. She turned to me. "Mr. Whitmore, your decision to place assets under Winter Hill Company, while unconventional, remains legal. The court finds no evidence that you violated any financial obligation during the marriage. All income was declared, and no funds were concealed." She raised her gavel. "The court rules. All legitimate fixed and liquid assets acquired by Mr. Ezra Whitmore remain solely in his possession. Mrs. Krista Langley is not entitled to spousal support. The mortgage loan and all invalid financial transactions are hereby voided. Furthermore, the court will forward all evidence related to forgery and financial conspiracy to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution." Each word struck like another chain breaking free from my shoulders. As I stood to leave, Krista softly called out, "Ezra, I just wanted to start over." I paused for a second without turning around. How you start over is your choice, but don't ever think I'll be the one to step back. 4 months after the hearing, I stood in the snow-covered yard of a log cabin on the western slope of Montana, quietly watching the pine trees in front of me. The cold wind still howled through the door cracks. The scent of pine and wood smoke still lingered, but no one was waiting for me to call home. No more ex-wife pretending to be annoyed when I came home late. Just me, a rocking chair, and the peace I never thought money could buy. This cabin wasn't new, but it was the only place I had never brought Krista into. I'd purchased it through Winter Hill Holdings 7 years ago, intended as a quiet retirement plan. Now, it had become the place where I was reborn after everything else collapsed. Krista received 2 years of probation and was ordered to repay the stolen funds with interest, but with her current job at a small retail store in El Paso and a shredded credit history, repayment existed only on paper. The court didn't pursue charges for Plan B due to lack of clear criminal intent, but the record was permanently marked. I heard she now lives with her sister, shares an old car, and recently got denied for a home loan. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, only emptiness. A part of me once wanted to believe Krista had been manipulated, maybe led down the wrong path by someone else. But the evidence was undeniable. She wasn't coerced. She chose. She planned. She walked through the ruins of our trust with steady feet. And Devon? 2 weeks after the trial, Levi sent me a news article from Arizona. A recently divorced resident physician named Karen D. had lost her entire 6-figure savings after trusting a personal trainer named Devon H., who claimed to be a startup investor. This time, Devon vanished with her digital assets using a fake name and still hadn't been caught. Police documented the case, but no charges had been filed. His face in the blurry image from the security camera still wore the same grin, the kind that belonged to someone who always believed he was one step ahead of the law. I closed my laptop after reading the article. Didn't save it. Everyone faces their darkness differently. As for me, I chose to step into the light. All the property in Kerrville had been sold. Thomas handled the paperwork, Levi oversaw the transfers, and I simply signed. The old belongings, from the sofa to the fridge, even the picture frames that once hung in the living room, were either donated or destroyed. I didn't take anything that had been touched by Krista, not out of hate, but because I refused to let the past intrude on the life ahead of me. Harold was the only person I kept in touch with from the old town. He'd send me little updates. Who moved into the house, how many puppies the neighbor's dog just had, and sometimes just a photo of the sunset sky over the backyard. He understood. Sometimes it doesn't take many words to preserve something genuine. I wake up early every day, brew coffee with a hand-pour kettle, then step outside to watch the snow melt from the wooden rooftop. Some mornings I hike into the woods, carrying a survival knife and a small notebook. I don't write much, just a few lines, how the weather feels, how strong the wind blows, what I noticed along the trail. In the afternoons, I sit on the porch steps playing old country songs on the radio, listening to the wind sweeping through the canyon. Occasionally, a moose appears in the distance, standing still for a few seconds, as if deciding whether to approach the human who now lives in its territory. Recently, I got a call from an oil company in Canada offering a short-term advisory role, high pay, no strings attached. I haven't responded yet. I might say yes, I might not. These days, the choice is entirely mine, unbound by schedules, promises, or anyone else's expectations. Ezra's story is a clear reminder of awareness and the strength of inner resolve. After being betrayed, used, and nearly stripped of his life and dignity, he didn't choose revenge through hate. He chose intelligence, legal precision, and silence at the right moments. In a world filled with manipulation and deception, Ezra proved that truth, when protected with reason and courage, will eventually be vindicated. Now he lives a life of independence and peace. No one holds the power to hurt him anymore. What do you think about Ezra's choices and how he overcame everything? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more real-life stories about family, trust, and the journey to reclaim oneself.